Serafina Voss had learned, very early in life, that the world was not built for women like her. She was not the daughter of a powerful alpha. She had no land, no bloodline worth mentioning at formal gatherings, and no title that could open doors or silence rooms. What she had was a sharp mind, steady hands, and a quiet kind of dignity that she wore the way other women wore crowns, without thinking about it, without needing anyone to notice. And for 3 years, one man had noticed. Caden Ashford, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, had chosen her. Not from a list of noble daughters presented to him by his council, not through political arrangement or family alliance. He had met her at a border market when she was 17, selling dried herbs with her mother, and something in him had simply stopped. Like a clock that had been running too fast finally finding its correct rhythm. They built something together over 3 years. It was not perfect. Caden was difficult, proud, sometimes cold, always carrying the weight of a kingdom on shoulders that refused to ask for help. But Serafina understood him in the way that only a few people are ever truly understood. She saw through the armor, she knew the man beneath the title, and she loved that man completely. She believed he loved her the same way. She was wrong. The Grand Alpha Convergence happened once every 10 years. Every major Alpha King, ruling queen, pack elder, and supernatural dignitary gathered under one roof to conduct the business of their world. Alliances, territory agreements, declarations of peace or warning. It was the most significant event in the supernatural calendar, and this year, it was held in the Grand Palace of the Eastern Bloodline, in a hall so large that 1,000 candles could not reach its highest corners. Serafina stood in that hall, in an ivory gown her mother had spent 2 months sewing. It was simple. It was not the work of palace tailors, but she wore it with the same stillness she wore everything, completely, without apology. Caden stood beside her as the evening began. He was everything a king was supposed to look like, tall, composed, immaculate in his dark formal coat. He had barely spoken to her since they arrived. She had told herself he was nervous. Kings carried tension into rooms the way weather carries pressure before rain. She told herself a great many things that evening that turned out not to be true. When Caden walked to the ceremonial podium at the center of the hall, Serafina assumed it was for a scheduled diplomatic address. Several kings had been scheduled to speak. She watched him from her place near the side of the room, proud in the quiet way she always was when she watched him command a space. He cleared his throat. The hall went silent. And then he spoke words that rearranged the entire structure of her life. I, Caden Ashford, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, formally and publicly sever the mate bond between myself and Serafina Voss. The silence in the hall became a different kind of silence, the kind that presses against your ears. She is not fit to stand beside a king, he continued, his voice steady and clear, the voice of a man who had practiced these words. This decision is final. The bond is dissolved. He placed the bond-breaking ring on the sacred stone altar at the center of the podium. There was a sound, not a sound anyone in the room made, but a sound that only Serafina felt, deep in her chest, like something that had been warm her entire life suddenly going cold and dark. Every eye in that hall turned to her. 1,000 faces. Some horrified, some curious, some, and these were the worst, satisfied. Serafina Voss stood very still. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not reach for him, or beg, or ask why in front of all those watching eyes. She simply took one slow breath, lifted her chin, and walked. Through the parted crowd, past the whispers that had already begun moving like water around her feet, through the great doors, and out into the cold night air. She walked until the palace lights were behind her. Then she stopped, pressed her back against a stone wall, closed her eyes, and let herself feel it. Just for a moment, just for herself, with no audience, how completely he had broken her. She allowed herself exactly that. One moment. Then she straightened, and she kept walking. What Caden had not considered, when he made that public declaration, was that 5 other men were standing in that hall. 5 Alpha Kings, each ruling their own territory, each attending the convergence for their own political reasons, and each of them had just watched something that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with character. They had not watched Serafina fall apart. They had watched her hold together. King Malachi Dorn of the Eastern bloodline was a man who had spent his entire life studying people, their weaknesses, their ambitions, the small ways they revealed themselves under pressure. He had seen queens weep at lesser provocations. He had seen men of great power crumble at public embarrassment. He watched Serafina Voss absorb one of the most humiliating moments a person could experience and walk out of that room with more dignity than the man who had just publicly discarded her. He leaned toward his advisor and said quietly, "Find out everything about her." King Riven Solace of the Shadow Isles had not planned to attend the convergence at all. He had not attended the last one, or the one before that. He was not a man who enjoyed rooms full of people performing importance at each other. He had come this year for one specific meeting that had nothing to do with any of the other kings present. He stayed for one reason he had not anticipated, and that reason walked out of the hall in an ivory gown, while 1,000 people stared at her back. King Theron Vale of the Southern Highlands was 24 years old, the youngest ruling king in the room, and the anger that moved through him when Caden finished speaking was sharp and immediate. He didn't know Serafina. He had never met her, but he had grown up watching his father treat his mother as a convenience rather than a person, and he had sworn, quietly and seriously, that he would never be that kind of man. He watched Caden walk back to his seat, as though he had simply completed a bureaucratic task, and something deep in Theron's chest decided something without asking his permission. King Aldrich Stone of the Iron Fortress was 51 years old, the oldest and most respected king in the room, and he had outlived 2 queens and buried more regrets than most men accumulated in a lifetime. He watched the evening with the particular attention of someone who had already made many of the mistakes currently being made in front of him. He summoned his general before the night was over and spoke 3 words: "Locate the woman." King Elio Crest of the Coastal Kingdoms was, by general agreement, the most charming man in any room he entered, which he knew, and which he used carefully rather than carelessly, because he understood that charm deployed without conscience was just manipulation wearing a pleasant face. He watched Serafina leave and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, the specific, uncomfortable sensation of genuinely wanting to know someone, not to collect them, not to win them, just to know them. He found a raven before midnight and sent a short letter. It contained 4 words: "You deserved better, E." Serafina did not remain in the Northern Realm. She returned home, packed what was hers, and left within 48 hours. She did not leave dramatically. She left practically, the way she did most things, with a list, with purpose, without announcing herself. She traveled to a small border town called Ashfen, where pack laws held no authority and no king's name carried social weight. It was quiet. It smelled like pine trees and river water. It had an apothecary on the main street, whose elderly owner had been looking for help for 6 months. Serafina walked in, explained that she knew herbalism, showed what she knew, and was hired before the afternoon was finished. She cut her hair. She stopped wearing ivory. She learned new remedies she had never had time to study, when her life was organized around someone else's schedule. She woke early and worked late, and fell asleep reading, and, slowly, in the way that healing actually works, not dramatically, but quietly, like bread rising, she began to feel like herself again. It surprised her, that feeling, because she gradually realized she was not returning to who she had been before Caden. She was becoming someone she had never yet had the space to be, smaller in some ways, larger in others, entirely uncomplicatedly her own. The kings found her, of course. She had not expected that. Malachi arrived first, under the cover of a diplomatic visit to Ashfen's neutral trading post. He was polished and direct in equal measure, which she respected even as it unsettled her. He walked into the apothecary and did not pretend he was there for any other reason. "I am not here by accident," he told her simply. "I haven't been anywhere by accident in 15 years. I wanted to meet you. I've met you. I'll be honest with you from this point forward, if you'll allow it." She told him she would think about it. He nodded, as though that were a perfectly reasonable answer, which it was, and left without pressure. Riven simply appeared one evening on her doorstep. No crown, no guards, plain clothes, dark eyes, and the specific energy of someone who had forgotten how to begin conversations. He sat down on her front step, as though he planned to stay there indefinitely, and said, "I make terrible company. I've been told I'm tolerable in small doses." He came back the next evening. He came back the evening after that. He never stayed long. He never asked intrusive questions. Slowly, without either of them formally deciding anything, he became the most consistent presence in her days, the one who was simply there, without agenda, without performance. Theron sent gifts. None of them were expensive. All of them were specific. A book she had mentioned in passing to someone else entirely. She never learned how he found out. A particular variety of tea she had been searching for since leaving home. A handwritten note that read, "I am 24, and I rule an entire kingdom, and most days I still don't know what I want. You seem like someone who knows exactly what she wants. I find that frightening and completely wonderful." She read the note 3 times. She did not throw it away. Aldrich came to the edge of Ashfen territory and met her there, as though he understood instinctively that her space was important to her, and he had no business entering it without being invited. He did not court her with flowers or poetry. He spoke to her plainly. "I have had 3 queens," he said. "None of them were treated as equals. I understood that too late in every case. I am old enough now to know what I lost, and what I want to do differently. I am not offering romance. I am offering a genuine partnership between 2 people who respect each other. Think about it. There is no deadline." She did think about it. The absence of a deadline, she realized, told her more about him than anything else he could have said. Elio made her laugh. That was the thing about him. He was the only one who made her laugh, genuinely, in the first month. He came into the apothecary one afternoon, claiming to need a remedy for a cursed and uncontrollable sense of humor, and kept the bit going long enough that she smiled, then kept going until she actually laughed, and then looked surprised at himself, as though he had not entirely planned it. He talked her into a walk along the river that stretched into 4 hours without either of them noticing. He did not ask a single question about Caden. He did not treat her like someone who needed careful handling. He treated her like a person who existed fully outside of what had happened to her, and she had not realized until that evening how desperately she had needed someone to do exactly that. User. Caden heard about all of it. Reports arrived on his desk with the methodical consistency of something he could not ignore, no matter how much he wanted to. Malachi and Ashfen. Riven returning 3 times in a month. Theron's very public comments about women of extraordinary character in a speech technically about border policy. Aldrich repositioning 2 diplomatic schedules to accommodate something in the neutral territories. Caden told himself, with increasing force, that he did not care. He had made his decision. The marriage to Isolde was proceeding. The eastern and northern realms were aligned. His council was satisfied. Everything was going according to plan. He did not sleep well. He found himself, in the middle of meetings, remembering things he had not thought about in months. The way Serafina argued with him, never to defeat him, but because she genuinely believed what she was saying, and she respected him enough to say it directly. The way she used to read aloud when he had too much on his mind to settle. The way she had never once, in 3 years, asked him for anything she had not earned. He told Isolde he needed to take a brief diplomatic trip to the neutral territories. She looked at him for a long moment, with eyes that were sharper than he had ever given her credit for, and she said nothing. He went to Ashfen. Serafina was behind the counter when he walked through the door of the apothecary. She was in the middle of labeling a row of small glass bottles. She finished what she was doing. She thanked the customer who was leaving. She set down her pen. Then she looked at him. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "I have work." He spoke. He tried to explain the politics, the pressure, the decisions made in rooms where her name was never spoken, because people like her were not considered variables in power arrangements. He tried to explain that he had not, and he stopped. She raised one hand, quietly, and he stopped. "You didn't break the bond because you had no choice," she said. Her voice was calm. There was no performance of strength in it. It was simply true. "You broke it because I was the easier thing to lose. I know that. I understand it." She paused. "But understanding why someone hurt you doesn't mean you accept it." She picked up her pen. "I spent 3 years making myself smaller so that you could feel larger. I didn't even notice I was doing it until I stopped. I'm not angry at you, Caden. She looked at him one final time. I'm grateful, because whoever I'm becoming right now, I like her. You never would have let me become her. She went back to her work. He stood there for a long moment. Then he walked out. Outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, was Riven. He said nothing. He did not need to. Within 2 weeks of Caden's visit, every one of the 5 kings sent formal correspondence. Not to Seraphina, but to each other. Each letter, delivered simultaneously across 5 kingdoms, made the same declaration. Each king formally and publicly announced his intentions toward Seraphina Voss, and formally warned every other king that interference of a coercive nature would be treated as an act of aggression. It was, in the careful language of royal diplomacy, an announcement of war, not of blood, of pursuit, of worth. The effect across the supernatural world was immediate. Marriages were reconsidered, alliances shifted. Smaller pacts began quietly choosing sides. Isolde called off the engagement herself, with a dignity that surprised everyone and surprised no one who truly knew her. Caden received all 5 letters in his throne room and read each one in silence. On the evening the letters were delivered, Elio found Seraphina closing up the apothecary. He leaned against the doorframe and waited until she was done. Then he asked her one honest question. Not about any of us, he said. What do you actually want from your life? She thought about it for a long time. She looked out at the river. I want to finish learning everything this work has to teach me, she said finally. I want to write it all down so it isn't lost. I want to build something that belongs to me, and I want to love someone, whoever that ends up being, as my whole, actual self, not the version that fits around someone else. Elio nodded slowly. Then start there, he said. Everything else will follow. She stood at the window a long time after he left, watching the last of the light leave the hills above Ashfen. 5 kings were moving across 5 kingdoms. One ex-alpha king was sitting in a throne room with 5 letters, and a silence that had teeth. The entire world that had once dismissed her was rearranging itself around the gravity of one woman who had simply refused to disappear. She had not asked for any of it. But standing there, in her own shop, in her own town, in her own skin, she found that she was not afraid of what was coming. For the first time in a very long time, she was ready for it.